The year is 480 BC. The most powerful empire the world has ever seen is marching toward a tiny Greek city-state that dares to defy it. Persian King Xerxes commands over 2 million men, according to ancient sources, though modern historians suggest perhaps 100,000 to 300,000, still an overwhelming force by any measure. Against this tide of humanity stands one Spartan king, 300 of his finest warriors, and a few thousand Greek allies. This isn't just a story about a battle. This is a story about what happens when ordinary men decide that some things are worth more than life itself. The Battle of Thermopylae has become legend, immortalized in films and comic books. But the truth is somehow even more compelling than fiction. Because what really happened in that narrow mountain pass wasn't just about military strategy or bronze and blood. It was about a civilization making a choice to bend the knee to tyranny or to stand, knowing full well that standing meant death. And in that choice, in those 3 days of defiance, something was born that would echo through every generation that followed. Let's start with Sparta itself, because you can't understand this story without understanding these people. Imagine a society so focused on military excellence that boys were taken from their mothers at age 7 and thrust into brutal training that would either forge them into warriors or break them completely. The weak were left to die. The strong learned to endure hunger, cold, pain, and humiliation without flinching. By the time a Spartan male earned his citizenship at 30, he had survived 2 decades of conditioning that would make modern special forces training look almost gentle by comparison. These weren't weekend warriors or conscripted farmers. They were living weapons, raised from childhood for one purpose: to hold the line. Now picture Xerxes. He inherited the greatest empire on earth from his father Darius, stretching from India to Egypt, from the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf. But there was one prize that eluded Persian control: Greece. A decade earlier, his father had sent an army to subjugate the Greeks, and the Athenians had humiliated them at Marathon. Xerxes would not repeat his father's mistake. He would bring such overwhelming force that resistance would be madness. He spent 4 years preparing, building bridges across the Hellespont, digging canals, assembling warriors from every corner of his empire. When his army finally marched, it took 7 days and 7 nights for it to cross the bridge. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a demonstration of absolute power meant to break Greek will before the fighting even began. The Greeks were not united. Far from it. City-states that had warred with each other for generations now faced an existential threat, and still they bickered and delayed. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to retreat behind their walls. But Leonidas, the Spartan king, understood something crucial. If the Persians reached southern Greece unopposed, the alliance would crumble. Someone had to buy time. Someone had to make the Persians bleed, to show Greece that these invaders could be resisted. And so Leonidas looked at the map and found Thermopylae, the hot gates, a narrow coastal pass barely wide enough for a wagon, hemmed in by mountains on one side and sea on the other. Here's what makes this moment so profound. Leonidas knew he was going to die. Spartan law and religious custom forbade the king from leading the full army during certain festivals, so he could only take his personal guard of 300 royal bodyguard, all men who had living sons to carry on their bloodlines. He gathered allies along the way, perhaps 7,000 Greeks in total, but the core was always those 300. And before he left, he told his wife Gorgo something that would be remembered forever. When she asked him what she should do, he simply said, "Marry a good man and have good children." He wasn't coming back, and everyone knew it. The first 2 days of battle were a masterclass in tactical genius. The narrow pass meant Xerxes couldn't use his numerical advantage. His soldiers had to funnel through, and waiting for them were warriors who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of close-quarters combat. The Spartans fought in the Phalanx Formation, shields locked, spears protruding like the quills of some great metal beast. Wave after wave of Persian infantry crashed against them and broke. Xerxes sent in his immortals, his elite guard of 10,000 who had never tasted defeat. They died just like everyone else. The Greeks would pretend to retreat, drawing the Persians into traps, then wheel around and slaughter them. The pass became a killing field. But Xerxes had something the Greeks didn't: information. a local shepherd named Ephialtes, motivated by the promise of reward, revealed a mountain path that would allow the Persians to flank the Greek position. This wasn't some narrow goat track. It was wide enough for the immortals to march through in formation. When Leonidas learned that his position was compromised, he faced the defining choice. He could order a retreat, save most of his men, live to fight another day, or he could stay and give the retreating Greeks every precious hour of daylight to escape and regroup. He stayed. He dismissed most of the allies, keeping only his 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians who refused to abandon them, and 400 Thebans of questionable loyalty. On that final morning, knowing death was circling in from front and behind, the Spartans made their stand not in the narrow pass, but in the wider plain. They wanted room to kill as many Persians as possible before the end. They fought with spears until their spears shattered. They fought with swords until their swords broke. Then they fought with daggers, with bare hands, with teeth. Ancient sources say Leonidas fell early in this final battle, and the fighting over his body was so fierce that the Persians took his corpse and retreated 4 times before finally overwhelming the defenders. When it was over, Xerxes had won his battle but lost something far more valuable: the aura of invincibility. The Greeks had seen that Persians could die, that numbers alone couldn't guarantee victory, that courage and strategy could make even a doomed stand meaningful. More importantly, the delay at Thermopylae gave Athens time to evacuate its citizens and prepare its navy. A few months later, at Salamis, that Greek navy would destroy the Persian fleet. The following year, at Plataea, the Greeks would shatter Xerxes' army and end the invasion forever. But the legacy of Thermopylae goes beyond military outcomes. This battle became a defining myth for Western civilization. The idea that free men fighting for their homes are worth more than slaves fighting for a king's glory. It's been invoked by everyone from the Romans to the rebels of the American Revolution to resistance movements facing impossible odds. Because the story asks a question that every generation must answer: what are you willing to die for? And the Spartans gave an answer so clear, so absolute, that it still resonates 2,500 years later. The truth is, we'll never know every detail of what happened in that pass. Ancient sources contradict each other. Numbers are inflated or reduced depending on the author's agenda. But the core truth remains: a small group of warriors chose death over surrender, and in doing so, inspired an entire civilization to believe it could win. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the sword in your hand, but the example you set. Sometimes losing a battle means winning something far greater. The 300 Spartans understood this. They carved their answer into history with bronze and blood, and we're still reading it today.